giving me the go-ahead.
Yeah, I know.
Oh.
Yeah, go.
Go. Welcome. Wow, what a crowd. There we go. Thank you, everybody, for coming. What an amazing crowd and turnout. Whoever can be seated, it's great. Thank you all for coming. My name is Steve Antoneris. I'm the president of the Point Reyes Village Association. We are one of the sponsors of this event and has a short history to how we got here. The Village Association, which goes back to the 1970s in its inception, has for the past several years been reading a land acknowledgement. Recently, we decided we needed to do something more than just read a land acknowledgement. So we reached out to Theresa Harlan. We've donated money to the Felix Cove organization, and this event, while we're not responsible for it, it's the wonderful efforts of the Harlan and Whitney families. We see this as the opening chapter of a longer conversation, the long conversation as it's called. So that's all I have to announce. We are impressed and proud that the community has turned out like it has, and we hope that we see more of this kind of dialogue evolving in the future. So with that, I'm going to introduce Amate, who will be moderating tonight, or this afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Hello, community. I love it. Yeah, I'm a call and response kind of person. My name is Amate, and I have the great honor and responsibility to live here as a renter. I live in Inverness. And today has been long overdue. You know, we have been talking about land acknowledgement for a while, and it's really time to get to action, to concrete action, to help repatriate our relatives, the Coast Miwok people who want to be here. So on that note, we have a number of other Indigenous folks in the room. We have Joe Sanchez right here in the front, who's part of the Coast Miwok Council. We have a number, thank you for being here. We have Alma, who is a Zapotec Indigenous person from the South. We have Sarah Moncada, who's also here with us, who's back there. We have Tanya, who is also here, who's a relative from Canada. And we have many other Native people in the room. So if I haven't acknowledged you, please come introduce yourself, and I'll be happy to do that as we go on. So the program came together as an idea from Theresa and Joe, who have been in conversation with each other for a few years now to find their way back to each other. And so our hope is that today, this conversation is going to build a greater sense of belonging and togetherness between all the people in this room so that we can build a community where everyone actually belongs and we can actually not just plant seeds, but get to concrete actions to bring back Coast Miwok people to their homelands. So this conversation comes from a place of an open heart and an open mind, and we hope that you can feel that energy in the room as we begin to talk. And so as we gather to say, what is it that we want to achieve here? What we want is for you to walk out of here feeling inspired by knowing that actually through building strong relationships that are honest, that are where people are really present, we can actually repair historical ruptures and actually repair our common humanity. We know that this repair has to start by telling the true stories, the hidden stories of Indigenous people, of California, of Point Reyes, of Inverness. Without knowing the truth of what happened to the original stewards of the place, how can we actually build repair? We also, each of us needs to cultivate practices, medicine, skills to be able to stand with each other, like and truly see each other and be able to build across our differences. Only that can help us navigate through our trauma, through the complexity of what we have to face, through the pain that we need to face in order to co-create a new future. We know that repair is possible when authentic relationships that are truth-telling, that are based on honorable actions, are what we're cultivating together. So the flow of this conversation is we're gonna have Theresa and Dewey are gonna come up and share some ground stories, history of this place. After we hear from them, we're gonna bring the Whitney family to come and have a conversation. This is not a performance. This is us pulling the curtain back and saying this is where we're at in our relationships to repair and heal. I also want to say that I'm part of the Strawberry Circle, and I'm a Nawa, which is Indigenous person from the South, from Mesoamerica. My people come from the land of volcanoes and oceans, now known as El Salvador. And my grandmother taught me, that wherever you go, your first duty is to find out who were the original stewards, who are the original stewards, to ask permission and to say, what can I do? And so while I've been in the area for about 10 years supporting the Latine Mexican workers and the ranchers find their voice and power, I came to live here 3 years ago. And one of the first people I met was Theresa. And Steve Costa actually recommended that I meet her. And so I called Theresa and I said, I'm moving to your traditional homelands. What can I do? And she took me to Felix Cove with Tiger. We walked down, we talked. I heard the stories of her uncle, her mother, her aunties, and I got inspired to say, how can I be part of the change? And so those are the kinds of relationships and actions that we're wanting to invite you into. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up Theresa Harlan, who is the founder and director of the Alliance for Felix Cove. The Alliance for Felix Cove is an Indigenous woman-led organization dedicated to rematriating the Felix family home at Point Reyes Seashore. Theresa has a long history working with Native American community as an art curator, a writer, and a consultant. She curated the traveling exhibition, Sing Me Your Story, Dance Me Home, Art and Poetry from Native California in 2007, 2011. And I also want to bring up our dear and beloved community member, Dewey Livingston, who most of us know is a historian, an archivist, a map maker. And he has worked in California and Marin County for 5 decades, has written extensive histories of Marin, the California Channel Islands, Death Valley, and other places in the West. And so with that, they're going to be sharing some histories, and then we're going to bring up the Whitney family and be in conversation with them. So thank you and welcome.
Wally Ko, how amazing you are, Amate, for bringing us all here together and really setting the energy and sharing our intention today. So grateful for you for having that gift to be able to do that. The clicker, the slide clicker. So what I'm going to do is just give a brief history of California, how it created itself and established itself. I'm not a historian, and so I'm sharing quotes from the book, We Are the Land, A History of Native California by Atkins and Bauer. But, when California became a state, the legislature created the 1850 Act for the Governance and Protection of Indians, which limited Indian sovereignty and mobility through indenture. And it was really a continuation of the encomienda system of the Mexican era, in which children could be taken at 3 years and put in servitude for ranches and wineries. For the colonial settler, they became the enslaved labor. And they amended the law in 1861 so that it didn't require parental consent. And I will say that, you know, that parental consent is interpretive, because if you get deep into the history of California, you will read the stories where people will say, how did you know they were orphans? And the response is, I know because I killed the parents. So, you know, the era of colonization for California, Indigenous people, is an era or a reign of terror. In that you really didn't, you're getting pushed further away, your food sources are being eaten by hogs and sheep, your grasses, your acorns are not there. And you're pushed to the margins of your homeland. And then again, in the 1850s and the 60s, we read that the United States paid more than $1 million to California to fund militias, private militias, which could go out, and if someone was in their way, someone on their property, someone gathering water, someone gathering acorns that they didn't want as an Indigenous person, they saw them gathering things on their land, they could shoot them and then get reimbursed if they provided the body part to prove that they had killed an Indian. And so that is, you know, was the reality of the genocide of California. And, you know, $1 million in that 19th century era is a lot of money, but that was the money that was spent and reimbursed on militias and private militias. And so, you know, this is the history that Amate was talking about, that we have to face, we have to know it. It's fact, it's not conjecture, it's not anecdotal ideas, it's really what happened. And you know, I encourage you to read books, and probably, you know, this crowd, you've probably already read this book, you know, or find the book, and you, if you follow Heyday Books, there's a number of good books there as well. So, you know, this is the time. My grandmother was born in the late 1880s. Our great-grandma, Euphrasia Felix, and Domingo Felix met and married around the 1850s in what was then Yerba Buena, as we know it as San Francisco, and then came back here. So we can only, this we don't have fact, but I assume that she came out of the missions. They met in San Francisco. Domingo Felix was Indigenous Filipino, and so they came back. What we don't know is if they came back to Felix Cove, as some of you know as Laird's Landing, if they came back because she knew that was home, or she was familiar with it, or it was a place that they wanted to settle and raise their children. So here's a map that that Dewey provided from 1860. You see on the left the Rancheria, 3 little dots. Those represent Indigenous dwellings, a living site, and that's Marshall Beach. So our family, the Felixes, settled in both at Laird's Landing and Marshall Beach. And at Marshall Beach is where, according to my mom, was the first home that the family built. And then the 2 little dots south of it, below it, is Laird's Landing. So we know in 1860 that the map makers recorded Indigenous families living in those coves. And so, you know, it's, at that time, people are not putting names. But here's an image of my grandmother at Felix Cove with the bay behind her. And when she died in 1949, the owners of K Ranch evicted my grandpa, who was Swiss-Italian from the Campili family, Arnold Campili. They evicted him and my Uncle Victor. And I love this picture because, you know, it's my grandparents, my mom. You can barely see her in the up ground, but that's her in a skiff or a dory with her row. And I'm almost at time. So, you know, the driving thing was that my Uncle Vic fought in court to keep the land. He did not walk away when Attorney Lundgren said, we want you out. He made them go to the courts. And unfortunately, California laws were not written to protect indigenous land rights or homelands. They were written to protect and enable settler colonials to settle in and occupy and own land. So my uncle unfortunately lost that lawsuit. And so we are at Alliance for Felix Cove working to repair that injustice, to address that injustice, and to allow us, persuade the park, take a risk, give us the 15 acres and let us fix it up. Let us bring in money and people to work the land and make it beautiful so all of us here in this room can enjoy it. So that's what I wanted to start with.
I'm going to talk a little about I was thinking of the word transition, but that's not really a very good word to put to it because we're looking at the time when the land here was stolen from the Támal Ko people. There are a number of words that you could put to it. So transition might be a way we think about it, but this is from the time when the Támal Ko people lived here and tended the land. They used fire, they tended oak trees and groves, they used every bit of the land and the occupants of the land to support their life. And when Spain came along with its missions and established Mission Dolores in San Francisco in 1776 and started reaching farther and farther out into the Bay Area they'll call them converts to the Catholic Church, but really it was a situation of there wasn't much choice. You either go or you escape or you hide. And so if you can picture the Point Reyes area at that period of time, it was occupied by people. It was occupied by a rich culture, families going back thousands of years. Pretty soon they made it illegal to have fires on the land and more restriction. And so not only were the lands being emptied of the people that were taking care of it, but there were laws being made that whoever was there or came back were limited with how they could do their cultural traditional practices. And so there was a period of time out here where the land was probably kind of abandoned from being tended and cared for to nothing happening until some cattle were brought in by the mission. It was really the Spanish government and the Mexican government that came in 1821 that really stole the land, I think you could say. That really set the motion into the process into motion. And so for a while, from 1820s into the 1830s, there was really not much going on here, and we don't really know how many indigenous people came back and occupied the area, because it appears to me that you had to be kind of secretive. It wasn't their land anymore, and come back to where they could. And there were certain enclaves, like in Nicasio, where the council has purchased land again, where it was possible to come back. And that's a beautiful piece of property that is really part of what they later called the Rancheria, and it's worth having a look at if you have a chance to. So when Mexico was taken over by the United States, first, what Mexico did was it was the first one to give out the land to individuals. And this is drawing lines now and saying, okay, this is yours to Rafael Garcia, this is yours to Antonio Ocio, and to James Richard Barry, who was an Irishman who had taken Mexican citizenship. So that period in the 1830s and 40s, things were being divided up literally, and that was another part of taking the land away, basically stealing the land and formalizing it. And when we became a state in 1850, they brought in the surveyors and the lawyers and all of that to divide up the land in its final point into ranchos and ranches. And there you start the appearance of fences and bringing in more and more cattle. And so it changed into this landscape of a knowledgeable care into a completely new kind of knowledge coming from the East Coast and other parts of the world where it was tended in an entirely different way. This period in early California in the 1850s is what brought people interested in land, and you could say land speculators and Point Reyes Peninsula ended up being owned faultily by 4 different people, and it ended up in court. And the major law firm that handled the major litigee was Shafter, Park, and Haydenfeld. And it was that law firm, and especially the 2 members of Oscar and James Shafter, who developed the ranching system. So we're really a couple of generations removed from the stealing of the land, but the Shafter Empire, as it was often called, was the one that put in place a regimen on the land that was really hard to go back from, to return from. So I think that it would be time then to go to what happened next and talking about the different families that interacted during this period. Oh yes, well there's one slide. Huh? Oh, do you want me to do that now? Okay. So Oscar Lovell Shafter came from Vermont, and you'll hear about that. This is one of his ranches that he and his people developed. That's the J Ranch, which is today's Kehoe Ranch. And you can see how they divided up into the alphabets. And the Oscar L. Shafter estate comprised the northern part of Tomales Point, except for the Pierce Ranch, and also the Lake Ranch down on the south. And then one more thing I'd like to read. I thought I'd do this later, but this is the only real account of that we've run across. I have not run across accounts of massacres and all the terrible things that were happening around the country, although Rafael Garcia, one of our land grantees here of Olima, partook in such actions farther north and took slaves, murdered people. But in the 1880s, it was found that through a census that there were about 60 so-called Indians living on the west side of Tomales Bay. And I'll read this starting partway through. They lived by fishing and hunting and were great clam diggers and eaters. They annoyed the white settlers more or less. And this is Seahart Merriam writing this, who was studying indigenous peoples at the time in the early part of the 20th century, doubtless for good reasons and retaliation for brutal deeds. I think that's a good little thing to add in parentheses. And about 18 years ago, C.W. Howard, the owner, he was actually the manager of most of the land on the west side of Tomales Bay, ordered his men to evict them. The men went there and tore down the Indians' houses, while one of their number stood ready with a gun to punish any Indians who might resent the destruction of his home. As a result, most of the Indians crossed the bay and scattered and soon became practically extinct. I think that's all I need. It says a little more, but that's probably all I need to say. Thank you.
All right, we just heard quite a lot. So I'd like to just take a moment to sit with what we've heard. So please put both feet on the ground, move your body a little bit, and let's take a deep breath in and hold it for a moment and then breathe it out. Take another deep breath in, hold it, and breathe it out. I'd like to invite us to take a moment of silence. If you have been following the news around Indigenous people in this country, I'm sure you heard President Biden account for and apologize for the boarding schools. Less than a month ago, the remains of 6 children were sent back to their homelands, and they were received in Montana and other places. The bodies of these children sat unrecognized for over 100 years. Those parents, those nations in agony for not having their children. Those kinds of things continue to happen today. And yet I'd like for us to take a deep breath and to sit and send prayers to those children, to those families, to those nations who are welcoming the bones of their relatives back home. Let's take a moment so that their spirits can rest. Thank you. So what we're doing here today is about repairing those harms. Another thing my grandmother said is like, when you come and you see a mess, you see something, you don't ask who created that. You quietly clean it and you make sure that it's restored. And so today we're inviting all of us to be in that conversation of restoration, of how do we heal ourselves, heal the tendons, the muscles, the tissues of our humanity. And so with that, I'd love to have Dewey and Theresa come back and join us at the front. And I'm gonna invite our 2 guests. First, I wanna bring up Nick Whitney, a 3rd-generation summer resident who became a full-time resident here in 1970s. He says, I am the great-great-grandson of Oscar Shafter, who along with his brother James Shafter, acquired the title to most of Point Reyes Peninsula and established a 30-tenant run dairies. And I also want to invite to the front Joe. Joe Whitney is a Brooklyn-based writer, the author of 2 books on the Cold War. His writing appears in the New York Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the New Republic, and he curates in the Brooklyn Public Library cultural programming. In 2022, he was part of a team that invited Joe Baker of the Lenape Center to present the Lenape Hopling at the Brooklyn Museum Library, described as New York City's first Lenape curated exhibition in a public institution in the city. Help me welcome them. So we're going to be in conversation for about 20 or so, 30 minutes, and then we're going to have an opportunity to hear from you, what's emerging, what's bubbling up for you. But I want to start with asking Joe, because was it Joe who called Theresa? Yes.
So she tells me.
All right, Joe, the story goes that one day you dialed Theresa's number and you reached out and began a relationship. So we'd love to hear what inspired you to do that? What were you feeling as you dialed the number and were waiting for her to respond?
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Dance Palace and all the organizations and people behind this, including Alon. It seems like a no-brainer. I was reading the Point Reyes Light, as I do when I come out here in the summer. I was here for my cousin Zirks's surprise 50th. He was very surprised. And the aftermath of that was a little bit anticlimactic, and suddenly I'm reading about Theresa, and her vision was so plain and so clear and seemed good. Her family had been in Felix Cove, which we called Laird's Landing. non-Indigenous we. And they were removed in the 50s, and I guess the context for that was, the Indian Removal Act, relocation. I think in 1958, the rancherias were ended. And so this idea that Indian people were in the way seems to have undergirded her family being evicted. I did not know. I was part of a family that had been involved in a prior eviction. And so, yeah, I reached out to her and said, I'm not local. I have family roots here, but I have family who are local, and I'd love to hear more about this historical display that you wanted and protection of buildings, which are, in fact, the last Miwok created buildings on the peninsula. And she gave me a tour of the cove, and I think there were some local kids who were brought there on a little pirate mission. A sailing group was doing a scavenger hunt. And I didn't know Theresa, and I think there's a world in which Theresa could have been very protective of that space, and has been and is, rightfully so. But there they were, these little kids looking for a clue, and the first thing Theresa said was, can we help? What is it? Is it a piece of paper? And Theresa helped these little local sailors find the clue for their scavenger hunt, and they found it, and they were off. And she gave me a tour, and I understood the vision was just something that had to happen. And but before that, you mentioned the Lenape exhibition, and in 2020, the Brooklyn Public Library invited the Lenape Center to do our first land acknowledgement. And this is what I want to hold up. How late in the game is it that in 2020, the Brooklyn Public Library does its first land acknowledgement, or an event like this? It's so late. But the people who did that, Joe and Adrian, I went out with them after and had a lunch, and I said, what do you need? What do you want? And I didn't know that was a revolutionary thing, but they held it up, and they said, no one had ever asked us that. And so I felt like they had something to do with this. They were standing on my shoulder and saying, if you're not Indigenous, you should be asking your Indigenous elders, what do you need?
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. There are about 5 or 6 seats in the front that are no longer needed. So folks who are in the back, we welcome you to the front. We know that sometimes people feel shy about being in the front, but we will not ask you any questions. So you just come to the front. All right, I want to come back to Theresa and then to the rest of you. Theresa, the question for you is, how did your desire to bring visibility to the Felix family, the history of forced removal of Coast Miwok people, and then to bring more Native relatives back to Point Reyes emerge for you?
It emerged from growing up. I was raised on the stories from here about our family and the community here and it was a community that intersected at so many different points. Jimmy McClure's name was familiar in these, stories being told in our family living room in Napa, Kehoe. Also, the intersection with Mexican ranch workers. When the family wanted a barbecue and music, they invited people, musicians and singers. My family was very musical. And then the stories of always being on the bay, rowing across the bay to get mail, get supplies, fishing on the bay. Everything was in the bay. In our family photographs, as you can tell, the bay is like a family member in the photographs. So going down to the cove, my first time after my mom died in 1998 with Dewey, it was Dewey and my sister and myself, it was kind of startling to see the house that had been so familiar through story and family photographs, and there it was in front of me, covered in ivy. And my first thought, well, nature's taking it back. Let it be. And the more that Tiger and I would take trips down and visit the house, the relationship, we started to build a relationship with the house, with the cove, with the land, with the plants. Memories were flooding in about my mom talking about that, her cousins and aunts and uncles talking about this. And I thought, their lives, they survive. They are the descendants of the ancestors who survived the terror of the Spanish missions. They survived the Mexican era. They survived American colonization. And they made it all the way here to the 50s, which is not long ago. I'm not talking 200 years ago. It's just a blink of an eye. And we need to recognize that legacy, recognize that journey of resilience and survivorance, and acknowledge the importance of that little house, that little humble house that was built by the great-grandpa and his brother. Where else? There's no other place of Támal buildings that exist. So that, and then also being on the bay, being at maybe Tony's Seafood and seeing people point out to Marshall Beach and know they have these memories. And I don't have memories. My cousins, we don't have those memories. We don't have the muscle memory. So it's bringing our relatives back, making the bay, making the seashore accessible to communities. And so that's what continues to drive me.
And just a little acknowledging of just the beautiful successes is that Alliance for Felix Cove has been able to bring and be in touch with hundreds of young people, Native youth, African American youth, and it's just been beautiful to experience that. Thank you, Theresa. So the rest of you, and I have 3 men sitting with us. The question we have for you is, what did hearing about Coast Miwok people wanting to return, what did that make you feel? So it's a feeling question.
It made me feel great in terms of, what I read about Theresa and her desire to rematriate Felix Cove. It sounded completely appropriate, and I'm pretty familiar with the Cove. I was in about a 2-week business relationship with Clayton Lewis, and and went fishing with him a few times, and did some other things with him. So I was pretty familiar with the Cove, and even before that, as a kid, we used to camp at Marshall Beach and see the buildings, and I realized that in my youth, her family was there, but I don't have any recollection of that. But it's 1955. I was 7, so I probably passed by with your family there, and so and sort of broadening it, being asked to be in this conversation, sort of pursuing our ancestry, this Shafter ancestry. I think we knew there's about a dozen other Shafter relatives here. My sister and her first cousin are I believe the oldest here, and Elizabeth's daughter Lisa, who has Pomo children. But we knew that we were descended from these people that owned the peninsula, or by American law and their smart lawyering, and in reading, Dewey knew so much more about my family, and there was so little anecdotally that came down from these folks, and it was Oscar Shafter was my grandmother's grandfather, so that shouldn't seem that far away. But I don't remember any anything that she said about her, although her Oscar Shafter died 12 years before she was born. So, and then, and then reading Dewey's accounts, and they were absentee landlords. So it was just capitalism. I mean, they were industrious, they had a big vision, and then, in sort of the white definitions of things, they were incredibly successful and, marketing butter to San Francisco and setting up all these tenant farms. And but viscerally, I think the generations before my grandmother bought Chicken Ranch in 1938, I don't think our family really had much contact with this land. And so we didn't get that, and I realized that, I've realized in this work for this day, what economically we're beneficiaries of this theft and this capitalism, which is, difficult. But I think, on a broader level, most of us white folks are also beneficiaries on some level. And there's an element of it that feels like, well, at least I can pinpoint the theft and the direct benefit that I have, and then and then I've been in Inverness all my life, and I've known the Sanchez's, I know Merle, I know, and sort of pushing it back as to, well, these people are all struggling. We're doing well. We live on the bay. It's not right, but it's the way it is. But your ask is, it seems so appropriate. You can pinpoint your house, and it seems so beneficial for everyone, for the park. I've done a lot of work for the park. I know that a big part of its vision is cultural, is a cultural, and but they ignore the Miwok culture, the national park. Except for Kuliloklo, there's nothing there, and I know they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and redoing barns or propping up the RCA radio stations, both here and this seems altogether appropriate. So I'm so thankful to you, Theresa, for being so open-hearted and welcoming. And I never would have gone on this journey without you.
Gamulish. So, can I just add a story in that when I met Nick, Joel introduced you to me as Uncle Nick. So I was like, okay, we're going down with Uncle Nick. And when we were walking down to the cove, my mom's 8th grade teacher, Theresa Perella, Miss Perella, is still living in El Cerrito. And Miss Perella on a visit said, your mother used to bring a little boy, and I think her grandfather and the little boy lived at the cove. And I was like, no, I don't know anything like that. And when we walked, you shared with me that there was a trail from Long Cove that used to join the road from Felix Cove up to the ridge. And my mom's godfather, Pensoti, lived there with his grandson. And so I can only presume that he walked that trail and my mom waited for him and then walked him the rest of the way to Pierce School. And I think that, you know, for me, the significance is that when Joel called, because until then I've been giving presentations and describing the Shafter family as pernicious. And when Joel called, I had, you know, half a millisecond to think, what are you going to do now, Theresa? You know, here's this human voice reaching out to you. Am I going to say, oh, I don't want to talk to you. You people are the colonial settlers that pushed our families out and pushed our ancestors out, and hang up? Or am I going to greet him and talk with him? And I laughed. And Joel said, you laughed at me. And, you know, and I appreciate that vulnerability of you making that call. And I had to explain I wasn't laughing at Joel. I was laughing at myself. Because it's like at some point you have to decide, are you going to live in a world of abundance and open-heartedness and open-mindedness? Or are you going to live in a world of exclusion and isolationism and scarcity? And I think that this is the driving point of this today, is to share that the Whitney family could have said, oh, that was history. You know, we're not, you know, you get over it. But no, instead we have this relationship that's authentic, that's learning. The Whitneys are big supporters of the Alliance for Felix Cove. They're modeling how descendants, how we as descendants can look at a future that's built on collaboration of being and greeting each other as relatives. And that's what I thought was significant with Dewey's work with history, the Whitney family engaging with us. That's modeling what's there. And so I thank you, Wally Ko. I thank you for sitting up here and having, and being authentic and being humble and vulnerable. And so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Beautiful. And as always, Theresa has a way of like being on time and following the energy and moving us right along. So the next question was about what it takes to repair the ruptures, and Theresa has already named some of it. And so if the two of you who haven't answered the first question could both talk about what it felt like for you as you heard, and also from your perspective and histories as individuals and your peoples, what does it take to repair the historical ruptures between the original stewards of this place and the colonists, the settlers who came?
Well, you first asked about how we felt about learning about this Felix Cove energy to bring it back to the family. And, you know, I knew Clayton Lewis, and we went down there and thought it was a really cool place. What a lucky guy to live here. What an eccentric character. He was really something. And he would tell stories about Bertha and Perfy being down there, which I'm realizing later I could probably believe only some of them. And it was only when I went to meet Theresa's mother in 1996 to interview her, and that's when I met Theresa, that it dawned on me how powerful this place is, how she talked about gathering herbs, rowing her boat, living a self-sustaining life there with her family, an extended family. And that made me both sad that it wasn't theirs anymore, and also elated that we're bringing out this history that could, I didn't have the idea at the time, but could bring this back to the family. And I think that we don't need to dwell on the sadness and the negativity of what has happened, although we need to acknowledge that, but to look forward and keep these relationships, grow these relationships. You know, I'm a historian type, and so I believe that one way to heal relationships is through knowledge and sharing stories. And that's not only sharing the stories of the Indigenous life and the families, but ours and our experience as white people growing up in California or wherever we are, or Brooklyn, and just sharing our experiences.
Yeah, and I felt a combination of eager, excited, curious, and ignorant. Ignorant because, as I told Theresa when we first met, this moment when you laughed, she said, "I can't believe a shafter." I had enough awareness to know I was a shafter, thanks to Nick and Dakota largely. But I grew up back east. I didn't know what that meant, and so Theresa said, "I can't believe a shafter is reaching out to me." And I kind of leaned in and said, "Well, I grew up back east. What does that mean?" And I think that's how our family learned what Charles Webb Howard did. And so that curiosity was coming from a place where I was sort of aware that I was ignorant, but I wasn't scared. I didn't grow up identifying as a shafter. I didn't have this sacred feeling for the shafters. The name alone made me feel like we might have known what they did. But then when I heard it, I instantly felt shame. But it wasn't a deeply ingrained feeling for the shafters that it was a paralyzing shame. I could read Theresa. I knew that I hate the word opportunity. It gets overused, but this seemed like a chance for all of us to become better citizens and family members. Like, this country has a lot of waywardness that we're all suffering from. And I think not knowing where we come from, not knowing who our land elders are, who our first relatives are, is a big part, of our lostness. I sometimes probably am not alone in feeling lost in our political moment, in our historical moment. And so it seemed, and it seemed just natural. It seemed right. It seemed normal. It just seemed overdue to and I don't want to overstate anything. We've met Theresa. We've made a new friend. It's not like we've made any major sacrifices, but if that's modeling what's needed, then we all should be doing it. If that's what Theresa tells us. I mean, that's the tendency. Like, what do you want? What do you need? And why hasn't it happened? And I think those are the questions that I would ask everyone in this room to look to ask.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just like to add, I think Theresa's vision of Felix Cove is beautiful and should happen. I think farther into the folks I grew up with, the Rockas, the Lopez's and Carrillos, and who are most of them displaced, not living. I think maybe the Rockas still have a place on the east shore of Tamales Bay, but I'm thinking, are reparations in order? I mean, these people, some of these people, I don't know how much, can they pay rent? What's their life like? What's their old age? Do we need to do more? Do we need to do, is there financial help? Besides asking Theresa what we can do we need to ask Debbie Rocca.
Yeah. So reparations and help, right? Like how do we give back what was taken, and what's our responsibility? What's my responsibility? I'm a Native person, but not from these lands. And so what is required of us to become welcome guests? You know, the journey between settler colonist to guest and then to welcome guest is a journey that we're talking about. And I love, our last question is about that medicine. You know, we like to call medicine everything from our plant relatives, from taking a deep breath. We're not thinking about taking a pill, but, you know, healing ourselves and being present. And so the last question we have for the panel is, you know, as you're in this journey to repair, to ask those tough questions of like, what is required of us to make it right, to the families who were pushed down and removed, you know, and therefore, like in the whole country, right, we have the question of how do we repair the relationship to the Indigenous people of the place? How do we repair the relationship to the labor that was stolen from Black and Indigenous people? Both those questions are so central to the healing of our humanity. And so on that note, what is the medicine, the spirit healing, the skills, the strategies, the actual concrete actions that you bring to support not just your relationship with Theresa and Felix Cove, but to repair the relationship to your own humanity and this land? And that's a huge question. So take it where it takes you.
Well, I go back, I think I said it earlier, that I think that sharing knowledge is a big part, but so much has to do with opening yourself to other people and to let go of the concept of outsiders or newcomers or old timers, or that we're all in this together. And what it comes down to is that there's no argument in my mind that of what is right in this situation and all these situations around the country. Like one of you said, it's a no-brainer, that I believe that the relationships can be repaired just in events like this and in personal relationships and in sharing our stories and pushing for some reparations. I really think it would be right to give Felix Cove back in title to the Felix family. And I'd also, and Theresa and I have talked about this, I think the name of Marshall Beach should be changed, because Marshall is not named for the town of Marshall, it's named for Robert Marshall Jr., who had a fortune from lumber mills and was a land developer. And he was calling it Laird's Landing Estates. And I don't think we should honor him with that name, myself.
Any of you? Anything to add?
Making things right is a big ask. I know Felix Cove seems like a small ask. Making things right is, I don't know how many generations, but I'm also I was also struck, not just the Native people, the legacy of the Shafters and the colonial settler legacy throughout this country, but we lost the grizzly bear, we lost the elk, we lost the mountain lion, we lost the coyote. We've got the mountain lion and the coyote back, but I mean, we as white people, can we even conceive of walking through this landscape with grizzly bear? But your folks did and navigated it, and without fear, or probably appropriate fear. But you know, that too is lost. Our ability to live in the world completely, and that seems like a big loss.
Yeah, I'm sort of with Dewey on this question of like, I mean, we want to build relationships. That's what Theresa has held up. Whenever I've offered apologies, she's sort of said, I'm here, I'm interested in relationships. There's a family story. Some of our relatives may have brought Jung here to the United States or met him when he wanted to meet a Taos Pueblo elder. He wasn't always so sophisticated in how he spoke about wanting to meet American Indians. He said primitive a few too many times in front of one that he met. And his name was Mountain Lake. And he saw Jung, and he looked him up and down and just saw this whiteness, this searching. And he said, we look at you white people and we wonder what you want, what you need. You're always looking for something, and we think you think with your heads. And Jung said, well, of course, what do you think with? Jung wrote about this in his memoirs. He said, well, what do you think with? And Mountain Lake went. And Jung says he had an epiphany, and he realized that from time immemorial, white people had basically been often little more than marauders. And he said, this elder taught me what the white person had been in my history. And, you know, it's an interesting story. I think Nick's grandmother's brother, Chauncey, was probably there when that happened. And a lot of the people who became our Berkeley neighbors, our family's Berkeley neighbors, were working with the Taos Pueblo to give back Blue Lake, I think it was. So there were environmental ties. I think knowing about the land, knowing the right stories, knowing how old the presence here was, how long back your people go, it should dwarf any pride of place that settlers and their relatives feel. And the traditional ecological knowledge that comes with that is just another no-brainer. We need that. And so for me, the medicine is finding the kind of story that reframes and kind of dissolves the propaganda that we're taught as our sort of birthright with privilege, that tells us it was somehow wrong or inappropriate for the first stewards of this area to be here. A completely baffling way of Europeans that Jung finally saw it. I think, by the way, he was 50 when he had that epiphany. Not a very precocious moment.
Thank you, Joe. Theresa, I'd love to have you have the last words, and then we'll turn it to the audience.
Okay, great. For me, the medicine is memory. I mean, just listening to Nick name the names of Talmoco people, of the families that lived here, sitting here with Joe Sanchez and his family on the Marconi side, you know, thinking about the folks that one time I went to lunch with Debbie Rocca, and I asked, do you think anyone remembers our family? And she's like, no, I don't think so. So the medicine is memory, because boiling it down, I'm simply the daughter of a woman who lived here, who thrived here, who had her little, who found conflict in schools, but also found empowerment in her physicality and her strength to be able to row across the bay 2 or 3 times before the afternoon winds came up. That is my medicine. So we also have a digital storytelling project that we're working on, which Joe Sanchez is part of. And so it's the sharing of those stories, those memories, celebration of it is that medicine. So, you know, Nick, your memories are part of that. Dewey, you're bringing these forward, and Joel, your ability to open up that door for sharing those memories. And I also just want to say that, Nick, you touched on actually a future discussion that we want to have here, which is how do we live with our relatives, the grizzly bear? How do we live with mountain lion and the little frogs that live on Thule? I can only share that friends who are from the Susanville area, Maidu, Pitt River, they have an annual bear dance, and that's a renewal of the relationship of the people with bears and rattlesnake, because both are out in the springtime collecting and harvesting berries. And so there's a mechanism that, the people were able to live. When I read books and I see, wow, the ancestors hunted grizzly, grizzlies chow down on beached whales. And my friends who are from Alaska clink it, how I was telling them about the story of the whales, and they said, oh, we sang songs to beach the whales. So then that way we could harvest the whales. So that's what we're missing is that knowledge, that indigenous knowledge and indigenous science in which we can all, learn how do we live with each other. So memory is my medicine in this moment.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so we're gonna have a few minutes to have you engage with each other. We know that as humans, we hear and we wanna reflect back. And so we're gonna give you an opportunity to do that. And after that, I will open the floor for questions. We have people also on Zoom with us, and so we'll be going to both the questions in the room and the questions of people who are watching us from their home. So the question that we want you to share with each other, turn to a neighbor, hopefully somebody you don't know that well, because it's about building new relationships. And the question that we want you to answer is, what is this conversation inspiring in you? Or you could choose to, how can you practice reconciliation to create a future of mutuality and coexistence? Right, so you'll have about 2 minutes each to share. At about 5, I'm gonna make a lot of noise and wave my hands, and that means I need your attention back. Please go ahead. Good job.
did. And I think it's a process of not openly identifying with that past action, which you reinforced when I offered the public apology in March. Look at how the fullness of the room seems to support that. And you can hear what people were in awe of, underlining what we said, snapping. Yeah. There was a good reaction to the word reparations.
All right, can I have your attention back? Yeah. Can I have your attention back? It's not working. Can I have your attention back? If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Okay, let's try that again. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Beautiful. Welcome back. Thank you so much for that beautiful energy. I want to call up an elder from the Shafter family, descendant of the Shafter family, who wants to share something. So, Kathleen, can you come up?
Okay. So, hi, I'm Kathleen Whitney. I'm Nick's older sister. I'm Joel's aunt, and therefore maybe the oldest Shafter descendant in this room, which is not something I'm particularly proud of. But Nick told me yesterday that we were talking about this whole thing, that the Shafters who owned most of all of the Point Reyes Peninsula, went around and at gunpoint evicted all the Native Americans that were there. Do you think that's true, Dewey?
Well, it was the son-in-law, Charles.
The son-in-law, but in their, I mean, Oscar was the, and,
In their name.
yeah, yes. Okay, so what I have to say to that is, I apologize. I apologize with all my heart for that terrible, terrible thing that my ancestors did. And I'm not proud of them. They didn't know any better, I guess. Anyway, I apologize. I apologize. I apologize. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, people in the room, for sharing. We'd love to open it up to you. We want to hear questions from you. So we'll take maybe 3 to 5 questions and then have the panel respond. And after that, we'll take questions from people who are watching us in the video. So raise your hand if you have a question. We have one back there, and then here, and then 2, and these 2 in the front. So we'll stop with that. Yeah, go ahead.
So I want to thank each of you for all the work that you do to this important work of land back and acknowledgement and reparation. My question is, how might we navigate the relationships? The state of California has created a model of starting to do land back and funding quite a bit to tap into that, to get some of the land that the state park owns, a lot of land along here, along Tamales Bay, to have them initiate some of this, as well as to work with the National Park Service to say, we do funding for many things, so why are we not using the funding for Felix Cove and for the state to change the name to Felix Cove on the maps, et cetera? How would you inspire us to navigate that?
Okay, so Theresa, we're going to take 3, and then can you answer that, just so that we get all the questions on the table? So you'll take that question. Next question I saw was on this side. Oh, she walked over to you, Kim. Yeah.
Thank you. This will piggyback on what you've already said. This is for Theresa. If you could describe your relationship with the Park Service now. I know you had a good relationship with Craig Kenkel, the former superintendent, and also what actionable things can we do now in addition to the medicine that you described earlier?
Thank you so much. And then third question here.
Oh, thanks. I'm Peter Byrne. I wrote about this at some point and continued to research it. And in line with what Dewey said about knowledge and what has just been said right now, I'd like to bring some knowledge here, which is that there are at least a half a dozen archaeological studies going back a century showing the extent of indigenous civilizations in Támal Hui. It was vast. There was hundreds of villages. A lot of it is documented to be destroyed by ranching. The Park Service headquarters is built on top of a shell mound. It goes on and on and on. It is a sacred site. And I think that the whole place should be given back to the original peoples for stewardship.
Thank you. All right, so that sounds maybe like a question for Dewey, perhaps, that last one, or... All right, so let's do one last question, and then we'll have the panel answer. So last question, I saw a fourth. All right, there's a hand here.
Well, I guess my question was kind of for the audience, but so maybe that doesn't make sense. But wondering if anybody in the room feels like building an annex on their property and then giving their home to an Indigenous person. Today.
Thank you. Today. I love it. I love that. All right, so let's go. Theresa, would you begin?
So the question about state parks, the state of California, state parks, national parks, one of the stumbling blocks or barriers is that government, whether state or national, works with federally recognized tribes first, and not unfederally recognized tribes, there are many in California. As you may know, the history of the treaties that were never ratified because California senators did not want to give land to Indigenous peoples during the early years of the statehood. So I don't lose my thought, and I did. But anyway, that is one of the stumbling. So when I'm in conversations or I get word that, hey, California Coastal Conservancy is having discussions about their 5-year plan, I say, great. Let me round up all the folks that I know that are on the coast who are not federally recognized to be sure that they're part of. And then I hear, well, we will have a separate meeting. So there's this isolationism that happens where we're not going to have federally recognized tribes and non-federally recognized tribes and grassroots organizations like ours all talk together. That is, again, yes, that divides us. And that comes out of scarcity. So that, when state parks, I talked to Armando Quintero, and he's like, well, let me see what happens with national parks, county parks, I will say, has been our best friend. That's why our activities are at White House Pool and McNear's Beach. But it's that, government entities not knowing who to work with or go out and build relationships, so then they fall to the safety net of federally recognized tribes. So that's an issue that needs to be resolved. And going back to Lisa's question is that we were moving forward really well with Craig Kenkel He invited us to submit a vision plan in order to secure a cooperative agreement like Blue Point, like Hagmeyer Ranch, like Commonweal as nonprofits. You can have a non-competitive bid or lease, through a cooperative agreement. He said, Theresa, you're big enough, you got the infrastructure, pulled together a vision plan. We did. We submitted a vision plan. I went to funders and said, hey, we're on the cusp. We're moving forward. We'd love to hire a master planner that would pull together and organize meetings of stakeholders, community members, Federated Indians of Great Rancheria, Coast Miwok Tribal Council of Marin, all the stakeholders of Felix Cove. And, Craig submitted that vision plan to Great Rancheria the last week of before he retired. And so now we're waiting. We're asking Ann Alton to have meetings with us so we can begin relationship with you. We can begin relationship with your new staff as they transitioned into new roles, like we had with Craig, like we had with Donna Four at Prinza. And it's not moving as well as we hope, so we send emails and we talk and we say, hey, because we have to, Alliance for Felix Cove and the National Park Service, we have to know each other as human beings. We have to be able to say, hey, come down and have lunch with us, take a walk with us. We were going in that direction, and now for some reason it's stalled. And I know Ann Alton and National Park Service have a lot on their plate right now. So, but Craig seemed to always make time for us to meet with me and my sister and Tiger and our Strawberry Circle Alliance. So that's what we're missing. We're missing that, okay, we'll meet with you on the patio and talk. And that's what we need. We need that human relationship so that we can understand each other. I can understand them. Love to hear, about, hey, how'd you get into Park Service? Hey, what is your whatever? That kind of humanity is what we're looking forward to build and looking forward to it. And I'm not saying that Ann isn't interested in it. I understand. It's just that, we would like to continue the momentum and we're hoping for it.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Any of you want to say anything else about the questions that were asked?
I have a response to Peter's comment, which is that when the ranches are gone, I'd like to see the Park Service put their, what do you say? You put their money where their mouth is and make the wilderness real wilderness. And that would mean stopping Pierce Point Road at the cattle guard and tear up that road into the wilderness. And that's same with all the rest of the wilderness. Get rid of those concrete bathrooms that are in the cherry stem roads. That's not real wilderness. But that's an opinion on another subject, I guess.
All right, thank you. We're going to go to people on the video and see if we have any questions from the people who were able to be with us through technology.
Hello. We have a question from Ingrid, who asked, is there a way for people to express to the National Park System our collective desire to return Felix Cove to its rightful owners? Can we create a local movement to organize and make our voices heard on this topic?
You're hired.
You have a new job.
Some of this is, again, grassroots. We're building and we're adding staff and, and we're building community, and this is really what I was hoping for to come out of this conversation. Is that for folks, you all live here. I live in Vallejo. I have to drive 90 minutes over to Felix Cove. I don't see it. And so, it would be great for folks who are on the bay hiking just to keep an eye out for the house. And if you have a boat, not everybody can walk that mile down to the cove. Let us know you have a boat, and that I might be able to say, hey, I'd like to bring someone over to the cove. Can you bring us over there in your boat? Or, we get tired. Tiger and I get tired in the drive back and forth. Do you have an in-law unit that we could, that we could stay in? Yes. Yeah. So, we're spending the night here, at the Whitneys. And so there's things like that, but definitely, we were on a good path. We hope to be on a good path. We hope to join the other cooperative agreement holders because when Craig left office, or before he retired, he shared that the Yurok tribe has an agreement with Redwood National Park, and he also shared that individual families have agreements with Redwood National Park. So what we're asking for isn't anything new. It's not revolutionary, and I think that's what Craig had in mind. There's already precedent, and who knows how many other national parks have agreements with families with lineal ties to the land. So one of our next things to do is really develop our core volunteer base. And to the person who asked the question, we're not yet there ready, but definitely that idea is not a new idea to us.
And Theresa mentioned if you have a boat, we have a small boat, and whenever we go up into that area, we check in on Felix Cove. And I'd love to see sort of a Felix Cove patrol because it has been vandalized. It's usually empty. And if somebody wants to contact me, maybe we could get together a schedule even.
So we're going to close because we're already 10 minutes past or 20 minutes past the time. But we do a couple of housekeeping things. There's a QR code when you can help donate to Alliance for Felix Cove. There's a sign-up sheet where you can get our newsletters and be involved. Tomorrow, we're going to be building a two-lay canoe at White House Pool, so you're welcome to join that. And just know that for us, it's on behalf of Felix Cove, I'm on the Strawberry Circle. It's about that land, but it's also about practicing Indigenous ways. It's about, bringing back all the stories. So it's not just about the land, it's about all the connections to the land. I happen to know this amazing young woman standing in front of me. I've asked her to help us close with a song. So it's someone I just ask you to help us do that.
Okay, so I know that we're talking about, this beloved bay, and this song references the ocean and the earth. So I'll sing it through, and then we'll sing it all together, okay? Earth and ocean, sand and rolling sea. Earth and ocean, sand and rolling sea. That's the first part, and then wind and motion, fire be lit in me. Wind and motion, fire be lit in me. All together. Earth and ocean, sand and rolling sea. Wind and motion, fire be lit in me. May the fire be lit in all of us.
May that be so. All right, and with that fire in our belly, let's give a big round of applause and thanks to our panelists.